We are live now. In 3 minutes. 1 minute, sorry.
1 minute, eh? All
It's
right.
loading now. Yeah, it's loading.
Sure.
Okay, we are live on Facebook now.
Good evening, brother and sister. Welcome to Online Retreat with Patrick Carney. I'm Rudy and I will be the moderator for tonight. In a short while, Patrick will deliver a Dhamma talk. The topic for tonight is about Nibbana. And I'm sure all of you will be very interested with Nibbana. So without further ado, Patrick, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. So this evening we're going to talk about the way to Nibbana or Nirvana. Nibbana is the Pali word. So in Theravada Buddhism we say Nibbana, and Nirvana is Sanskrit, and also Nirvana is English because it's in the English dictionary. So we're practicing Satipatthana, the applications of mindfulness, and this approach to meditation that puts mindfulness at the center of the practice is particularly characteristic of the Buddha. And in the Nikayas, in the collections of his teaching, there are different discourses in which he talks about Satipatthana. And one of the major ones is the Satipatthana Sutta, which is a kind of a manual that goes through the practice, the nature of the practice. And what we're going to do tonight and tomorrow night is look at the introduction to the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the applications of mindfulness. And we begin with the first sentence where the Buddha introduces mindfulness meditation, Satipatthana, as the way to Nibbana. And this is what he says. He says, this way, the four applications of mindfulness is a one-way street for purifying beings, transcending sorrow and distress, vanishing pain and grief, attaining the right path, and realizing Nibbana. So this is the introductory sentence. Now you notice that when he introduces this practice, he begins with purpose. So what is this for? What's the purpose of this practice? And my personal suspicion is that most people, when they take up this meditation, including people in Buddhist societies and cultures, practice mindfulness for their physical, social, and psychological well-being. And that's what most people are doing it for. That's certainly the case in places like Australia, but I suspect it's probably true even in Malaysia. And this is a very good purpose to have because it's practical and it gets us started. But what did the Buddha think mindfulness practice is for? Now, the way he talks about it is the first thing he does is he introduces the metaphor of the way or path or street. In Pali, this is magga. And usually it's translated as path, but it could be also translated as way or as street. So anybody who knows about the Buddhist teaching has heard about the Eightfold Path, Atangika Magga. And this, with the Eightfold Path, is the basic template for the Buddhist practice. So this idea of a path, what's the significance of it? Well, there are two things immediately come to mind. The first is that a path is something that people have traveled before. If no one has been this way before, then we do not have a path. Perhaps we have a desert, Perhaps we have a wilderness, perhaps we have a jungle, but we do not have a path. So a path always implies community. People who know this pathway and who have been there before, and other people who will come afterwards. So if we walk down a path, we don't expect that we're the last people ever to walk down this path. We assume that others will come after us. So the Buddha talks about this in a discourse called the City, Nagara Sutta, where he tells the story of a traveler wandering through a forest who stumbles upon, quote, an ancient path, an ancient road traveled upon by people in the past, unquote. And so the Buddha, not the Buddha, the traveler follows this ancient path and discovers the ruins of an abandoned city. An ancient city that's been abandoned and is now in ruins. And the Buddha explains, and then once the person discovers this place, he goes back and he goes and tells the king, and the king orders that the path be renovated, restored, and then the city is rebuilt and repopulated. And the Buddha says that his discovery of the path is just like that. It's the repetition of a discovery made by Buddhas of the past. And one day in the future, Buddhism will disappear, even the memory of it will disappear, and it'll be like that, a path in the jungle covered over by the jungle, and then in the future, someone else will discover it again, and it'll be restored. So this image of path is very powerful. What it's saying is that we are not alone on our journey. There are others who travel with us. There are others who have traveled with us in the past, and there are others who will travel with us in the future. So the idea of community is very strongly built into this image of a path. And secondly, every path has a destination. So a path is going somewhere quite specific. So if you're at SBS and you head off to the main north-south highway, and if you want to go to KL, then you turn south on the highway and you're heading towards KL. You are not heading to Bangkok. You're heading to KL. And if you're driving and you see a sign that says Bangkok straight ahead, you realize, whoops, I've got a problem. I'm going in the wrong direction. So a path has this sense of direction. It's going somewhere quite specific. And therefore it has a particular destination. And the destination determines its direction. The nature of the path being traveled. So if we've got a path, it's going somewhere. Where is the Buddha's path going to? What's the destination? Well, he says the destination is Nirvana. That's where it's going. And he emphasizes this very strongly when he calls the applications of mindfulness a one-way street to Nibbana. In Pali, this is Ekayana Magga. In the older books, it's translated as the one and only way. But this is not an accurate translation. The idea of the one and only way is an interpretation, not a translation. And it comes out of the Visuddhimagga, Path of Purification, which was written in Sri Lanka about 1,000 years after the Buddha. And the Visuddhimagga is Indian commentary. And when the Indians do commentary, they play with words and with meanings. And often if they're explaining an important term, they'll give a number of different possible interpretations. They'll give a whole list. And each of those members of the list provides people who are giving Dharma talks with themes. And with Ekayana Magga, the commentator Buddhaghosa gives, I think, 5 or more possible interpretations of this one phrase. The one on the bottom, the least likely, is the one and only way. But that's being picked up by modern Theravada orthodoxy, and often that's the one you'll be told about. But really, essentially, it means one-way street, going in one direction, eka ayana, one direction path, one going path. And this image of a one-way street is quite powerful, because essentially what it's saying, if you're going down a one-way street, and at the end of this one-way street, there's a destination. Every step you take takes you closer to that destination. If you just keep going, you will get there. So the Buddha is not only saying the purpose of this practice is Nibbana, he's saying if you keep doing this practice, you will get there. It's just a question of time. But as we said, most practitioners are not practicing for Nibbana. Their goals are usually more modest, more practical, because Nibbana is too distant and too abstract an idea for most people. Now, does this make the idea of Nibbana useless? I would say no. I think what it does is it gives us a sense of direction. It's a kind of guiding star that helps us navigate our way along the path of practice. So, for example, how do I know if I am making progress in my practice? This is a question that practitioners often ask. What criteria can I use to work out if I'm making practice or making progress or not making progress? Well, if I'm getting closer to embodying the ideal of Nibbana, then I'm making progress. So that's one way of looking at it. So let's look at what the Buddha means by Nibbana. What is he talking about? And this is a rather esoteric subject. I was once advised by one of my fellow teachers. He said, never talk about Nibbana. Never talk about it. And I think the reason was he thought, look, you know, you're just going to confuse people, and just don't go there. I thought this is very sensible advice, and I think I should talk about Nibbana. So, to get a sense of what the Buddha means, let's look at the way that he uses language. Because when we're doing this practice and we're studying the Buddha's words, we're studying his language, how he uses language to express what he's talking about. Now, one of the things that he does is that sometimes when he's talking about the Dharma, he will use words that are cognitive, and sometimes he will use words that are affective. We're going to go more into this later in the retreat, but essentially cognitive is about knowledge and understanding. Cognitive words refer to what's going on up here in the head. So, for example, the knowledge of how to be a skillful accountant and balance the books of a big company. That's cognitive. It's up here. Affective words are about feeling and response. They belong to the heart, not the head. So, for example, how I feel about my career as an accountant, whether I enjoy it and it gives me a great deal of satisfaction, or whether I dislike it and I only do it because I need the money. That's affective. That's the realm of affect, the heart. So we have the realm of cognition, the head, the realm of affect the heart. And the Buddha sometimes uses words that belong up here in the head, and sometimes he uses words that belong in the heart. So, for example, the Buddha is very interested in the problem of human life. And when he's talking about our fundamental problem, sometimes he will use a cognitive term, and sometimes he will use an affective word. So, for example, sometimes he will use the cognitive word avidya, ignorance or delusion. Have you come across that before? So here what he's saying is our fundamental problem is we don't know what's going on. And in our delusion, we act in ways that are destructive to ourselves and to others. In other words, he's saying the problem's up here. We don't understand what's going on. It's in the head. Other times he'll use the affective term, tanha, literally thirst, but usually translated craving. And here he's saying that our fundamental problem is we are driven. And in our drivenness, we act in ways that are destructive to ourselves and to others. And this belongs to the heart, not the head. Do you see the difference? And similarly, when he's talking about what's the solution to our problem, sometimes you use the cognitive term bodhi, awakening or enlightenment. And this indicates a state where we really do understand what's going on. In other words, it's up here, it's in the head. And sometimes he'll use the affective term, nibbana, which indicates the state of the heart when we are no longer driven, no longer obsessed, when we are at peace. Heart. So nibbana is a heart term. It's not a head term. It's a heart term. And realizing this is, I think, very important to understand what he's talking about when he talks about nibbana. So nibbana is an affective term. It describes how we feel rather than what we know. So it describes the state of our heart when we are not driven, when we are free from obsession and compulsion. And the Buddha talks about this by using the image of the going out of a fire. And the going out of a fire is really central because the Pali word nibbana comes from the Sanskrit word nirvana, which is derived from the verbal root va, to blow, and the prefix nis, out, to blow out, or to go out. So nirvana, the word nirvana suggests the going out of a fire when its fuel is exhausted. The going out of a fire when it runs out of fuel. This is the image that the Buddha uses. And so it suggests coolness, ease, peace, rest. So the Buddha lived on the North Indian Plain, and I don't know if you've ever been there. In particular, I don't know if you've ever been there in summer. It is really, really hot. It is oppressively hot. I once made the mistake of traveling across the North Indian Plain in the middle of summer in buses, non-aircon. It was definitely a mistake. Imagine trudging through a hot, shadeless plain. You are hot, parched, exhausted. And finally, you come to an oasis. There are green trees, green grass, shady trees, and a stream of clear water flowing through it. And here you find relief, peace, rest, refreshment. This is Nibbana. This is the kind of imagery that the Buddha uses. Now, when we don't have Nibbana, then the Buddha says our normal human condition is that we are burned by 3 fires that are burning all the time. These are the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So we are enchanted by our obsessions. We are enraged by anger. We are blinded by delusion. And so we thrash about under the influence of these, and we're damaging ourselves and those around us. So our lives are entangled in pain and sorrow, and we share this with the people around us. And these are the 3 fires. When these fires go out, we are cooled, calmed, and we live peacefully, without pain, without sorrow, and we share this peace with the people around us. This is the ideal of Nibbana. And you notice that it doesn't refer to some distant mystical state. In particular, it doesn't refer to something that happens after we die. It's about how we live now. It's both involves ethics and psychology. So Nibbana is psychological because if we don't have Nibbana, we are lost in our obsessions and delusions. And it's ethical because if we don't have Nibbana, then we live in ways that add to our own misery and the misery of people around us. If we do live in Nibbana, then our obsessions fade away and we live well, and we live in a way that minimizes our own suffering and the suffering of those around us. So it's very this worldly ideal. It's not about some mystical state after we die. So we're burned by these 3 fires: greed, hatred, and delusion. And the fires are fed by their fuel. And if you're acquainted with Buddha's teaching, you'll know that he was very concerned with the problem of attachment and clinging and the suffering that these cause. Now, why does the Buddha think that attachment is bad? Because you would think attachment is just part of normal human experience. And here we come across a misunderstanding, which comes because we're not hearing the Buddha in his own language. We're hearing him in translation. And often the words that the Buddha uses, there is no English equivalent that exactly captures it. So the translations are often simply wrong, and they have to be wrong because there's no exact equivalent. What the Buddha was talking about was what he called upadana. This is the word that's usually translated as attachment or clinging. Sometimes these days you see it translated as appropriation, like appropriating something, taking something for one's own, which is probably closer to what the Buddha was getting at. But to understand what he's talking about, we have to look at this image of fire and fuel. If we ask what sustains a fire is sustained by its fuel. It's fed by its fuel. As long as a fire has fuel, it will burn. As soon as the fuel is exhausted, the fire ceases. It goes out, it cools. Now, when the Buddha was talking about fire and its fuel in Pali, his audience would have understood the pun that he was making, because the word in Pali for fuel is upadana, and the word that gets translated as clinging, attachment, is upadana. It's the same word. What fuels upadana, the fires that burn us, our clinging and attachment, upadana. So it would have been quite clear to his audience what he was talking about, but not so clear to us. So when the Buddha is, or when we use the words clinging and attachment in the context of the Buddha's teaching, we do not mean normal human desire or dependency. We all desire, and we are all dependent upon relationships with others for our functioning. This is not upadana. We get closer to the meaning of upadana when we think about the particular form of desire that we call addiction. Now, this is a relationship where we're bound so tightly to our desire that it defines our identity, both to ourselves and to others. So people who suffer from addiction, one of the major aspects of their suffering is the feeling of being trapped, of there being no way out of this addiction. So if we feel trapped, we genuinely cannot imagine life without the object of our desire, because we cannot imagine who we would be without the object of desire. So without this substance, who would I be? Without this person, who would I be? Without this belief, who would I be? I, quote unquote, would cease to exist. I, quote unquote, would die. So my very sense of self, my sense of identity is sustained by my addictive relationships. So for the Buddha, we are fundamentally what we cling to, what we feed upon. You can get a sense of this if you've ever, like in meditation or even outside of meditation, if you've ever been in the situation where you are lost in a painful story that you are telling yourself. Has this ever happened? So suddenly you're thinking about something really, really painful, about a situation that was really, really bad. And you find you cannot stop thinking about it. You cannot just let it go. Now, the story is causing us pain. We don't want to think it, and yet we can't stop thinking it. So why? Why is it so hard to drop? It's because this painful story defines me. It tells me who I am, and it tells me what the world is. It makes me more real as the thinker of this particular story and the one who lives in the world created by this story. This is who I really am. And I'm attached to that person because it's who I am. And if I let go of this story, I let go of myself. And I genuinely can't imagine who I would be without it. I'd be somebody else. I would not be me. So this painful thought, this painful story limits me. I am the person in the story that I'm telling myself. And I am trapped as the central character in this story. This thought feeds me. Have you ever in your meditation been ambushed by a painful story and then you find yourself chewing over the most painful parts of it? So you're going through it, boom, 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 and you stop and you go back and chew over a particularly painful part. And you move on, you come back, chomp, 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 chomp. Why do we do this? We're feeding on it. It's it's feeding our identity. who we deeply think we are. So this is upadana. This is what we translate as clinging or attachment. We are defined by what fuels us, by our clinging, by our upadana. We are limited to be that person. And our clinging feeds who we deeply think we are. A fire is hot, agitated, burning. We are hot, agitated, burning from the three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. And these three fires create what we take to be normal, like what we think is the normal, ordinary world. What happens when these fires come to an end, when they go out? When they go out, we find coolness, peace, ease, and where we're no longer restlessly trying to make something else happen so that we finally feel okay. So this is Nibbana, going out of those fires. So the practice that we're doing, mindfulness meditation or satipatthana, is designed to take us to Nibbana. So how does it do that? As you can starting to see, in this practice, what we're doing is we are tracking the nature of our experience. We're learning to be continuously aware over time. So we're studying the nature of experience as it flows. And as we do this, we discover what is really going on underneath the surface. We begin to feel the fires that are burning our experience, which is one of the reasons why meditation is so easy to postpone, because often we don't want to feel those fires. So for example, when we start doing this practice, you start to meditate, we discover how difficult it is for our minds to quieten and for our hearts to calm down. And we see that we live in a state of chronic disturbance. And part of this is, and this is one thing we discover when we meditate, that our normal relationship to experience is infected by a sense of something to gain or something to lose from whatever we are experiencing. In other words, we begin to see that we realize that we relate to everything in terms of what's in this for me? What do I get out of this? And this relationship is what the Buddha calls tanha, thirst, usually translated craving. But again, notice this word thirst, again, its relationship to heat, to fire. Each of us has a sense that something that we really need is missing. We're not complete, and we're not good enough yet. We're never quite good enough. So we're driven to reach out and to hold on to something that will make us complete, that will make us finally good enough. And this drives us, there's a restless drive to this. And so it's like we're burning with thirst and we're driven to find something to quench this thirst, to cool this fire. And we can see this in our meditation practice when we notice that we're constantly manipulating our experience to make it right for me. So we're never completely satisfied with what's going on. And we're always determined to judge our experience as being somehow inadequate, not good enough, because I'm inadequate and I'm not good enough. And at the basis of this is this self-preoccupation, this desire to make all this about me. So this meditation retreat, what's it about? It's about me and my project. So the meditation, what's it about? Me. This meditation period, if I have one practice period, one session of meditation, what am I most interested in? I'm interested in what am I getting out of this? What's in it for me? And this is why we're continually judging our experience. This meditation session, what's it about? It's about me, my practice, my progress in meditation, my enlightenment at the end of the story. So I'm constantly judging the experience. Is this meditation retreat good enough? Is this practice session good enough? If I'm using breathing as meditation object, is this breath good enough? So this habit of judging and manipulating the experience goes very, very deep. And we've been talking about it a number of times already. So, people will ask the obvious question. I'm meditating, this happens. Is that right? Or is it wrong? Where's that anxiety coming from? I've got to have the right experience, because if I don't have the right experience, I won't be good enough, because I've got to get this. Grab, 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 grab. So I'm constantly judging and assessing the experience. Do I pass? Do I fail? Do I pass? Do I fail? So, we've all had the experience of we have a session of meditation. Well, I don't know, perhaps you haven't had this experience, but you might have had the experience where you finish a session of meditation and you think, that was really good. Now I'm really getting started. I think I should have a celebratory cup of tea and then come back to the meditation hall, and then I'm just charging along. Have you ever had that kind of experience? Have you ever had the experience where the bell goes at the end of a session and you think, that was a complete waste of time. I may as well have been watching TV. Have you ever had that kind of experience? You notice that both experiences depend upon that what happens to you in the meditation is to be judged according to a standard. And if it's not good enough, I'm not good enough. Craving. There's something missing. I've got to get something. So I've got to manipulate the experience. We find that, even in really simple ways, that people will talk about how I'm using breathing as meditation object, but it's not clear enough, so I'm trying to make it clearer. It's the same process. It's not good enough for me and my purpose. So I've got to manipulate it and massage it and change it to make it good enough. So this is the way that we normally relate to experience. We can see it vividly in the meditation, but we're doing it all the time. But one thing that the meditation gives us is that it shows us that we're kind of face to face with it. Now, the practice we're doing is training us to cool down, because the basic training, you may have noticed, is to simply experience this event right now as just this event right now, without judging it, without resisting, without grabbing onto it, without trying to change it into something else, without judging it as good enough or not good enough. So this is the practice of what Mahasi Sayadaw calls noting. To note something, to deliberately aware it face to face with it, this is what's happening. So we begin with something that we choose. We choose a meditation object. We note the meditation object. As soon as we start to do that, bang, we come across the fires that are burning. Restlessness, desire, aversion, etc., etc. And we find out we are distracted. We can't keep our mind on the meditation object. Bang, it goes somewhere else. So what do we do with the distraction? Well, what I could do is be very disappointed that I'm distracted. And I could judge myself harshly for being distracted. And I could come to the reasonable conclusion that this meditation is way too hard. And I could just walk out of the retreat and forget about it. That would be one strategy. Or I realize that I'm distracted and I note my distraction. Restless. What does restlessness feel like? Remember this morning we did the elements. What are the elements in restlessness? Well, air element, there's a lot of movement there. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it sharp? Is it dull? And so on. So this is the whole idea of noting distraction. The distractions are the fires that come up. When the fires come up, I just face it. This is what it is. It's just this. What my habit is to judge it. If I find I'm doing that, then I note, oh, I'm judging. And this is what judging feels like. So I'm doing this practice, and again and again and again, what happens is I get swept into the fire, burning with restlessness, fears, desires, and so on. Every time that I recognize this is what's happening now, this very experience of burning in this fire becomes my meditation object. Burning is just burning. That's it. It's not good. It's not bad. It's just hot. That's all. So what we're doing in this practice is cultivating a radical simplicity. We've mentioned this afternoon in the Beginner's Mind group, we talked about this, and I think at other times. The more the practice develops, the simpler it becomes. It's actually most complicated in the beginning. And sometimes meditators are surprised. It's too simple. This can't be right, can it? Yes. It's meant to be simple. What we're doing is we are cultivating a radical simplicity in our relationship to experience. So normally we use this event we are experiencing right now as fuel for making something else, something that promises us pleasure or pain, something that will keep the fire burning in the hope that something better will emerge sometime in the future. That's our normal relationship. But in this practice, we're training ourselves to stop making something out of this, to stop using it as fuel for something else. That this experience right now is just this experience right now. That's all. So we're developing a new relationship to experience where we're not trying to get something, we're not trying to avoid something, we're not trying to make something else happen. And the way to this relationship is one of elemental simplicity. This is just this. That's all. This thought is just this thought. This sensation is just this sensation. That's all. So the practice is very simple. And this is one of the major challenges to it, because we try to make things complicated. because we try to make them fit our agenda and our desire to improve things. But as the practice develops, things begin to get simpler, and we begin to cool down. And we discover that our habitual state of dis-ease, of discomfort, of drivenness and restlessness is actually just at the surface. Deeper down, underneath these currents, there is the peace and the coolness of the extinguished fires. So as we go deeper down into the depths, we discover a world which is our own natural heritage, but which has always been hidden by our surface attachments and delusions. And this is the world of Nirvana. There's nothing mystical about it. There's nothing supernatural about it. It's the world as simply experienced when nothing extra is added to it. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha describes the practitioner who lives in this world as, quote, living independently without clinging to anything in the world, unquote. So this describes the state of living once the fires go out, and what we have is Nibbana. Okay, that's enough for tonight. Thank you.
Brother and sister, Patrick has concluded his talk, and we would like to end the online transmission now. Good night and see you tomorrow night.